far as Justin was concerned, Ignatius was concerned, he didn't have these names, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They didn't exist. It was a later invention, and then Christians just can't believe that Matthew was actually written by Matthew, although there's nothing in the book of Matthew that would indicate that. Quite the contrary. Matthew 9:9 makes it very clear that the writer was definitely not Matthew.
Very good. Reb, I'm going to have you squeeze in one final. Somebody
Sure.
on YouTube chat, I told him I would try to get this question in, so we're going to do that now. Simple question, but we've only got about 8 minutes left. So why were there 4 Gospels? And I do apologize. I forgot the name, and I went back to look in the chat, and it deletes, I guess, the earlier on messages. So, but why were there 4 Gospels? Why wasn't there just one just to say, hey, here's how it is, and, the fact that they all don't line up? I mean... So could you just kind of touch base on all that for us?
Christians have speculated about this question. Church fathers wondered about why the 4 Gospels. As it turns out, there are a lot more than 4 Gospels, a lot more than 10 Gospels, a lot more than 20 Gospels. It's just 4 Gospels that made it into the canon. So there's the Gospel of Peter. I'm really happy the Gospel of Peter never made it in. It almost did. All right. It's very clear from reading the book of Mark that Mark had an earlier gospel, meaning an earlier writing about Jesus' life, that's lost. And it's very clear from reading Matthew and Luke that there's some other source that they were picking from. It's called Q, or the source, because their passages don't appear in the book of Mark. But these are the 4 Gospels that Christians came to believe were canonized. And it wasn't an easy matter. There was an interesting figure in the 2nd century who actually tried to make one out of the 4. There was a figure, his name was Tatian, late 2nd century, who thought, you know what, maybe it's a good idea to take these 4 Gospels and let's just make what he called the diatessaron. And it was actually his effort to squish all 4 Gospels into one Gospel that just had it all in it, because John is really quite different from Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But the real answer is that communities Christians came to believe that these 4 Gospels belonged in the canon, and there were other communities that thought there were other Gospels that belonged in the canon, but they weren't powerful enough. They weren't strong enough, so their view didn't make it, aren't a part of the Proto-Orthodox, and the views of the Proto-Orthodox, I mean, who we now call the Orthodox, because they're the people who current modern Christianity emerged from. They just thought Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, not in that order, should be the Gospels of the canon. But whoa, there were many, many other Gospels. We know about them, and we have parts of them, some of them discovered in recent years, although we knew about them because the church fathers mentioned them. So what occurred then is that when the important church fathers, like those in Rome, decided that these Gospels should not be a part of the canon because they didn't teach, in their view, what was orthodoxy, so copyists didn't copy them. Remember, in the ancient world, if you wanted a book, someone had to sit down and write it. And he had to write it on papyrus or vellum, which was a very tedious and very expensive job. So the books that the powerful people in the church, came to accept as what was canon and what was orthodox, who had apostolic authority, they believed, meaning Matthew wrote Matthew, which is nonsense, but Matthew, they can't believe that Matthew, because Matthew, Levi, was a disciple of Jesus, and that Mark was a secretary of Peter based on Papias, earlier 2nd century, and John was the son of Zebedee, and Luke was a companion of Paul. So those criteria became very important to the church, but it was really reversed. The way it worked is if the people who were in power liked the book and liked the teachings of the book, they then accepted it, and then those books were assigned these names, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The first person to assign these names to these books is Irenaeus, about 180. That means as far as Justin was concerned, Ignatius was concerned, he didn't have these names, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They didn't exist. It was a later invention, and then Christians just can't believe that Matthew was actually written by Matthew, although there's nothing in the book of Matthew that would indicate that. Quite the contrary. Matthew 9:9 makes it very clear that the writer was definitely not Matthew, but writing in the third person. Great question. Thank you.
אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נעשה